The idea for this film came about in 2012 when I was doing some volunteer work for a veterans organization. I was flying around the country interviewing vets, creating a promotional video for an NGO, and that was really what opened my eyes to all of the issues that this community was facing, and it also opened my eyes to how disconnected I was from it, how little I knew about what they were going through and what they had been going through for generations and generations. So I think through that process, it really inspired me to get involved more and to want to share the stories of veterans and their families with the wider community so that we could all kind of come together. Yeah, it's been around for a while, but it's just getting a little more recognition recently. And I think a good way to understand it is that it has more to do with guilt and shame, whereas post-traumatic stress we understand more as shock to the nervous system, having to do with fear-based trauma. So moral injury is more wounds to the soul. And it doesn't mean that what people did was immoral. It's not like that. It's really, when you're in the battlefield, you have to do things that go against how you were raised. We were raised to believe that killing is not right, but when you're in these situations, you have no choice. You have to kill. So it's what happens when you come home and you have to reconcile those things. So these are the wounds that really they're finding that no pills can treat.
And it manifests in guilt and shame and self-blame of, kind of, as Michael said, the things that you do while you're in combat that, that only like later on when you get home and you realize that you may have, that perhaps you took a life, and it's kind of how you deal with that. It's the injuries that hurt your soul.
Yeah, and it's not just about what you do, it's also about what actions you didn't take, which is we see in the film. One of our main subjects, has a lot of guilt around, being there to help Iraqi people, but being forced in a situation to ignore someone who was lying injured by the side of the road when he knew he could help this person. So those are the kinds of things that I think these young men and women, are grappling with when they come home so many years later that are still haunting them. I think that's probably a question for the subjects of our film who were there. That's a tough question for us to answer. Yeah. I think what I can say is that these guys are trained to take orders, and they know that if they start to question any of those orders, they're putting not only their life at risk, but the lives of all of their brothers and sisters who are over there. So while they're there and in that moment, the most important thing for them to do is to follow those orders. And I think it's only when they look back do they, perhaps that's when some questioning might come into place. Yeah, Tom and Anthony are both doing excellent. Tom, who you saw, went through the Power Breath workshop at the end of the film. That's put on by Project Welcome Home Troops. He's now actually living in DC, working full-time for Project Welcome Home Troops, traveling around the country, hosting these workshops for vets. Well, you're reminding me of something that one of our subjects brought up, and that was Shannon Collins, who's the mother of Jeremiah Collins, who you saw passed away in Afghanistan, who we found out took his own life. What she shared with us was that she was upset that the media was not showing every aspect of war, and it was not showing, frankly, these caskets as they came home, because that's also a part of it, Yeah, those are words that come from Katinka, who is an anthropologist, and that was sort of her perception that led her into her research. Obviously it's much more complicated than that, but I think seeing veterans come home who aren't taken care of, who are trained so extensively in the process of becoming a soldier, but then when they're asked to return back to civilian life are just sort of, lifted up from Iraq and dropped back into their family room without any any opportunity to sort of unravel from that process, I think that's, that's maybe where she was coming up with that idea that they seem to be just assassins that aren't cared for when they come home. Power Breath workshop, it's a week-long workshop, but there's one particular process that they do that's really powerful, that unlocks a lot of trauma, and these men and women are actually release a lot of that trauma. So the facilitators of the workshop don't allow us to film it just because the participants are in a vulnerable state, and also because they don't want people trying it at home just by watching it. It's something that you really need to be in that space. It's a part of a whole workshop. It's not something that can just be done on its own. It has its roots in India for sure, but it's been modernized and it's been studied extensively. Dr. Emma Seppala from Stanford University actually just published a book recently that focuses on the benefits of this particular breathing practice on the veterans community and on the general population, because everyone can do this. So it's just been proven, specifically her study with the veterans population showed that when they come through and they do this course and they go through this process, she followed up, I think their symptoms of anxiety and post-traumatic stress reduced by something like 40% after doing it just once. And then she retested them 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, and those symptoms stayed the same. So what it's implying is that this process it creates a change that's permanent, that's lasting. It's just a rhythmic breathing technique. It's just a meditative breathing technique that has a lot of depth and power to it. Well, I think we're realizing, especially with things like moral injury, that as it said in the film, that pills and some kinds of therapy can't really reach the depths of this pain. So I think people are now looking towards more holistic approaches, which are proven to work, actually. Things like the Power Breath workshop, meditation, nature-based therapies. These are all really, really powerful in curing and in helping to heal this community in ways where pills are really just masking symptoms. There certainly are situations where pills are appropriate, but I think there's so much more that we have to look at. There's just a much bigger picture that has to be looked at.
I think that with Tom, in Tom's journey, what he meant by forgiving God was really himself. I mean, this film is not really based on religion. It's more spiritual in nature. Tom had to kind of go deep within and forgive himself. He had that very transformative moment at the end of the film when he does the Power Breath workshop and the meditation. So I think it's the idea of God, whatever God you believe in, but in Tom's case, it's more like forgiving himself and the God within himself.
Like we said, Tom is now working full-time for Project Welcome Home Troops, and Anthony and his family moved out into the country, and Anthony continues to mentor veterans, and he's actually organizing local treks to give other vets the experience that he had through healing through nature.
So it's great that Anthony's organizing shorter treks, and Tom is organizing meditation and power breath workshops. So they're both doing incredible work to heal other veterans.